Every D&D group has them. The loot gremlin, the MurderHobo, the Horny bard. We call them classic tropes, but call them a room of unwashed and severely regressed psychopaths. Let I, Sigmund Freud, kind of, take down your D&D character tropes, yeah? Ah, yes, the bard. It is an unfortunate case, I must say. So stuck in the phallic stages of development, literally using your instrument to perform for and proposition anything from the tavern keeper to the literal dragons. Your lute is a desperate phallic extension, and no amount of seduction will fix the fact that your mother did not love you. Well, definitely more than a little bit harsh. But he's not wrong. The Horny Bard is kind of all about phallic fixation and the failure to sublimate. Now, those might be new terms for you, apart from phallic maybe, but I'm going to get into it and break it down for you. But before we do that, we need to look at the Freudian unconscious. This is how Freud breaks down the psyche, how our minds work. It's broken into three parts: the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. Now, your conscious is things like your thoughts and your perception, the things you're processing right now, you know, that food you're eating, that thought you're having that you can access. Your preconscious is more about things like your memory, your accessible memory, as well as your stored knowledge. Like, oh, I know 1 + 1 = 2, or something more complex than that, but you get the picture. Now, the unconscious is the hard one to get behind and the hard one to understand. The unconscious is all about our drives, our instincts, our desires. It might be things like fears. It could be anything that you're not inherently thinking about, you don't naturally access, but they drive the way we behave. So maybe, you know, you hear a dog bark and you jump. You're not thinking, I need to jump because there's about to be a bark, but your unconscious kicks in when you hear that bark and brings up that primal fear if you're, say, scared of dogs. The same thing might happen with spiders, wasps, whatever. Maybe it's the fact that when something happens, it reminds you of something really, really painful and it comes up out of nowhere. That could be part of your unconscious. The overarching idea is that you can't control your unconscious. Your unconscious kind of controls you in a way. It almost dictates the way you act and what you do. So if we apply this to the bard, then I think that Freud would argue that during childhood, the Horny bard, the focus was on pride, outward appearances, and a deep-seated unconscious anxiety around inadequacy. This is called castration anxiety. Now, that could stem from never realizing that mum loved you. Maybe there was no maternal love. Maybe there was no maternal care. So maybe that form of inadequacy came there. Oh, I'm not good enough for my mother, so I'm not good enough in anything. Maybe it's a bad paternal relationship. The thing is, we wouldn't know. But Freud would argue that something happened during childhood between child and mother and father. Honestly, with Freud, it's probably mother. But, you know, read his books if you want to know more about that. So to go on from this, Freud believed that arts and higher societal, cultural, creative things all came from libido. So you're accessing your sexual, your pleasure drives to then create something bigger with that. You're taking that psychic sexual energy and you're funneling or channeling it into something. And this is called sublimation. So what Freud would argue is that the bard, inherently the horny one, because other bards can be creative and artsy, the horny bard has failed to sublimate. He would say that they're not using outlets for their libido. They're just using it to get laid, get some. Which Freud would argue is like the most inefficient form of libido that you could have. So it's a failure of sublimation and a phallic fixation. Literally using your instrument to woo everything that moves for some form of validation, affection, or comfortability. If you're enjoying this video and you've followed along with any of my other content, be sure to go follow me on TikTok and Instagram. It's the same username. But for now, please do like and subscribe to the video. It really helps the channel. It's free and it only takes 2 seconds. But yeah, let's get back to the video.
Mama is not the law. I am the law. Judgment time.
Well, I totally don't know anyone that's going to be called out by this one. But the police paladin, or the overly righteous paladin, you do not love justice, you hypocrite. You are just protecting a hypermoral reaction formation to hide your filthy, chaotic id. I'm sure we've all met one, I'm sure we've all seen one, I'm sure many of us have decided we don't want to play an overly religious paladin, but hey, it suits some people, so let's not yuck someone else's yum, as it were. Now, before we get into this one, we need to talk a little bit about the id ego, and superego. These are 3 parts of the Freudian psyche. So the id is all about primal based desires, things like, oh, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat that thing, without really thinking it through too much. This is our immediate need for gratification. So you feel something, you do something about it. That would be your id. Next up is the superego. The superego, funnily enough, is kind of like the police. It's all of our internalized societal values of what's right, what's wrong. So this could come from parental figures, this could come from school, this could come from friends, it could come from anywhere, but essentially it's anything to do with our ethical code, our boundaries, our values, and what we believe is the right thing to do. Somewhere in the middle there is our ego, and our ego is basically the realistic moderator. It says that id, you really want this thing satisfied. Superego, you say that's bad. So I'm going to come in and, can we do it this way? Can we compromise? Come on, I know you want to steal that bread and you're saying we need money, so why don't we just go grab some money? So those are the 3 parts of the Freudian psyche, the id, ego, superego. So when a paladin is overly righteous, it's essentially a reaction formation. So somewhere along the line, there's a really deep, depressed id, or an impulse or a drive. Maybe it's a fear or an impulse that they don't want to broach. This would be unconscious. They wouldn't be aware of this necessarily. So what the ego is doing is it's overcompensating the other way. Oh no, we have this id, we have this impulse that we are desperately afraid of, something we really don't want to look at. So instead, I'm going to go all the way over here to my superego, and I'm going to go way too ethical, way too societally correct, and there is no wiggle room for this. So when they're hunting down criminals and those that are breaking the law so viciously, they're doing it because they're seeing their own repressed and fearful desires in that criminal. Again, not consciously, it's the drives and the instincts inside us. So it'd be their unconscious is noticing something within that criminal they don't like, and they need to correct it because it reminds them way too much of their own repressed, whatever that desire might be. It could be a deep anarchy, a sexual desire, it could be an aggressive desire, it could be anything. But the idea is the police paladin has something that their id is, wanting so bad, and the superego is not wanting so bad, and the ego just goes, we really don't like this, we're just gonna go over here.
Mrs. Doubtfire, help us, he's choking!
Help is on the way, dear!
Mrs. Doubtfire!
Help is on the way! Oh!
This caretaking is pathological and wrong. You are just controlling your party to be like helpless children so that you yourself never have to be vulnerable ever again. All right. Well, the group parent, or the group mom, as it were, is a classic case of transference. There's also a little bit of neurotic omnipotence there, but essentially what's happening there, or Freud would argue is happening there, is that there's some sort of unresolved childhood anxiety or trauma that's held within unconsciously. They're not necessarily aware of it. And instead of dealing with that, what they're doing is they're projecting it onto the party. So they can kind of retroactively begin to fix their own childhood anxieties or traumas or issues. Now, obviously we know this won't work because they're not fixing their own. They're basically trying to force the party into a helpless childlike role so that they can act the role of the parents in the way they wanted it to have worked, or the way they wish it would have worked. Now, there is a subtle sort of neurotic bid for control here. By making the party become those helpless children that you get to heal, feed, protect, you're ensuring that you take that sort of omnipotent role. You're the one that protects the party. You're the one that keeps them safe and alive and happy. So by doing that, you kind of put yourself in a position where you can never be vulnerable. You're putting yourself into the position of authority, strength, and power. So you don't have to feel like that child that came out of childhood with anxiety ever again. You just get to feel like the strong, powerful, and loving parent that you wish you'd had.
It's a righteous cock-knock, motherfucker! And then Scoots rushes in and sucker punches the Goblin King square in his dick.
Your ego has completely collapsed into Thanatos, proving without a doubt that you have the cognitive ability of a feral toddler that just bites everything, including by ankles. Okay, now this one, when you listen carefully, this doesn't account for all of these, but we have the MurderHobo. This is essentially something called Thanatos. So as I said earlier, we have the id, we have the ego, we have the superego, and that ego acts like the referee, right? So you've got your id, your primal desires, your superego, that sort of societal correctness, and in the middle is the ego that's giving you the realistic, in the middle guy of what's okay that satisfies both sides. The murder hobo is a breakdown of that ego. There's no more referee. There's just this constant drive. They're running on the pleasure principle, which basically means whatever the id says, the id gets. If the id is hungry, you take food. If the id is angry, you lash out. If the id is sad, you make that sadness go away in whatever way possible. You essentially do whatever meets your needs the best and the fastest. Now, this doesn't necessarily account for the murdering murder hobos. This accounts for the uninhibited push the red button without thinking about a murder hobos, what we might call those that just don't follow along with the plot very well. They just press things and pull levers and all sorts. For the actual murdering murder hobo, we bring in Thanatos, which is a pleasure drive, but it's specifically the death drive. And yes, Thanatos sounds like Thanos, and yes, Thanos is named after Thanatos, which is from Greek mythology, but Freud uses it to describe the death drive. Now, Thanatos is essentially the idea that Freud believes all humans have an innate nature for aggression and an innate nature to try and return things to their inanimate states. So in this case, the murder hobo is quite literally uninhibited by societal control and unchecked by their super ego. So they just go around essentially doing whatever they want with their aggression, their violence, and their need to return things to their inanimate states. And that's essentially all there is to it and what Freud would say. But I guess overall, you could just say that the murder hobo with Thanatos in play is essentially just running around a sandbox, creating chaos in their wake wherever they go. Apologies for the terrible accent. This is supposed to be Austrian, not German, but I don't know how to do either of them. So I suppose it has been fun. See you all in the next one, when Sigmund Freud might break down some more character tropes of whatever it is you want me to do. Well, that's it from me today. If you have any further questions or any areas you want broken down a little bit more, please do let me know down in the comments. And let me know if any of these resonated with your character's psyche itself. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.